The exchange student Jake Morrison had never believed in aliens. He grew up in a small town in Texas, joined the Army at 18, and spent 12 years becoming one of the best snipers in the United States military. He had fought in 3 wars, earned medals he never talked about, and carried scars both visible and hidden. Aliens were for movies and crazy people on the internet. Then the ships came. The Galactic Assembly made first contact on a Tuesday afternoon. Massive vessels appeared above every major city on Earth, and suddenly humanity learned that they were not alone. The universe was full of intelligent life. Hundreds of species had formed a peaceful government that spanned thousands of star systems. And they were very, very curious about the violent little planet called Earth. The aliens were not afraid of humans. How could they be? Humanity had just discovered fire in galactic terms. Their weapons were primitive. Their ships could barely reach their own moon. The assembly looked at Earth the way a grown adult might look at a toddler holding a stick, but the toddler was interesting. Humans had been fighting wars since before they could write. They had developed thousands of ways to kill each other. They had created weapons that could destroy entire cities. And unlike most species in the galaxy, they had never stopped fighting. The assembly scientists wanted to study this. Their military leaders wanted to understand it. So they proposed an exchange program. Jake was selected because of his record. He was 34 years old, calm under pressure, and had more confirmed kills than any sniper in his unit's history. The brass told him it was an honor. They told him he would represent all of humanity. They told him to make Earth proud. They did not tell him that every alien in the galaxy would think he was a joke. The transport ship took 3 days to reach Theron 7, a moon orbiting a gas giant in a system Jake could not pronounce. The Valari Combat Academy sat on this moon like a crown on a king's head. It was a massive structure of glass and silver metal, with towers that reached toward the stars. Thousands of students came here from across the galaxy to learn the art of war. Jake stepped off the transport carrying 2 bags. One held his clothes and personal items. The other held his rifle. The orientation hall was full of aliens. Jake had seen pictures during his briefing, but pictures did not prepare him for the reality. The Valari were the dominant species here. They stood over 7 feet tall, with silver skin and 4 arms. Their eyes were completely black, like pools of oil. They moved with a grace that made Jake think of dancers or snakes. Other species filled the hall as well. The Dreth were reptilian, covered in green and brown scales, with tails that dragged behind them. The Morphi could change their shape, flowing from one form to another like living water. There were beings made of crystal, beings that floated instead of walked. Beings that Jake's brain simply refused to process. And all of them were staring at him. Jake was the only human in the Academy's 1,000-year history. He was also the shortest person in the room by at least 2 feet. He stood there in his army uniform, holding his bags, and tried very hard not to feel like a mouse at a cat convention. A Dreth approached him. The alien was young, probably equivalent to a human teenager, with bright green scales and curious yellow eyes. "You are the human," the Dreth said. His translator device made his voice sound mechanical, but friendly. "I am your assigned roommate. My name is—" He made a sound like a garbage disposal eating rocks. Jake blinked. "I'm going to call you Tom. Is that okay?" The Dreth considered this. "Tom. Yes, this is acceptable." They walked together through the Academy's halls. Tom explained that he was here because his family had served in the Galactic Fleet for generations. He asked Jake many questions about Earth. What did humans eat? Why did they only have 2 arms? Was it true that humans slept for 1/3 of their entire lives? Jake answered as best he could. He was more interested in watching the other students. Most of them carried sleek weapons that glowed with inner light. Plasma rifles, Tom explained. Standard military equipment throughout the galaxy. They fire superheated gas contained in magnetic fields, Tom said. Very accurate. Very deadly. They can cut through most armor in seconds. What about those? Jake pointed to students carrying devices that looked like flashlights. Laser weapons. Good for precision work. They overheat quickly, but skilled users can do remarkable things. Jake noticed something else. Many students wore what looked like jewelry around their wrists and necks. But these ornaments glowed faintly, and Jake could see a shimmer in the air around the students who wore them. Personal shields, Tom said before Jake could ask. They create an energy field that stops most attacks. Plasma, lasers, even physical strikes. Standard equipment for combat. They reached the weapons inspection hall. A line of students waited to have their equipment examined and registered. Jake joined the line with Tom, feeling the weight of his rifle case in his hand. The instructor was an ancient Valari named Victor. He had silver skin that had faded to gray with age, and one of his 4 arms was mechanical. He moved down the line with practiced efficiency, examining each weapon with a critical eye. When he reached Jake, he stopped. His black eyes studied the human with cold curiosity. "Open your case," Victor said. Jake obeyed. Inside, nestled in foam padding, lay his M110 rifle. He had carried this weapon through 3 wars. He had cleaned it, maintained it, and trusted it with his life more times than he could count. To Jake, it was beautiful. Victor's reaction was not what he expected. The old Valari made a sound that could only be laughter. Other students turned to look. Within seconds, the entire hall was staring at Jake's weapon and making similar sounds. A kinetic weapon? Victor's voice dripped with amusement. "You brought a projectile weapon to my academy." Jake felt his face grow hot, but he kept his voice calm. "Yes, sir. The galaxy abandoned such primitive tools 3,000 cycles ago. Plasma is faster. Lasers are cleaner. Your little bullets cannot penetrate even the weakest shield." Victor shook his head slowly. "I had hoped the humans would surprise us. Instead, you bring a relic that belongs in a museum." Jake looked at his rifle. Then he looked at Victor. "With all due respect, sir," he said quietly, "there's a reason humans still use them." Victor laughed again. "We shall see, human. We shall see." Jake closed his case and walked away. Behind him, he could hear the other students whispering and laughing. The human and his primitive weapon. The joke of the academy. Jake did not mind. He had been underestimated before. It usually worked out in his favor. Lessons in arrogance. The first month at the academy was the hardest of Jake's life. Every morning began at what the aliens called first light. Jake would wake in his small room, do his exercises, and prepare for another day of failure. Tom would watch him with those curious yellow eyes, never mocking but always confused. "Why do you still train with that weapon?" Tom asked one morning. "Everyone knows it is useless." Jake finished cleaning his rifle and set it carefully in its case. "Because it's mine." The training halls were massive spaces filled with simulation technology that made Earth's best video games look like cave paintings. Students would enter virtual battlefields and fight using their registered weapons. The technology was so advanced that Jake could feel the heat of plasma fire and the impact of simulated strikes. He lost every single match. The problem was the shields. Every student wore them. Every student relied on them. When Jake fired his rifle, the bullets hit the energy field and stopped dead. They did not penetrate. They did not even slow down his opponents. The other students simply walked through his fire and eliminated him with single plasma shots. Mike was the worst. He was a Valari noble from a powerful family, with 4 arms that moved like striking snakes and black eyes that looked at Jake with open disgust. He was the top-ranked student in the academy and had been for 6 consecutive cycles. The human loses again. Mike would say after every match. Perhaps tomorrow you will bring a sharp rock. It would be equally effective. The other students laughed. Jake said nothing. Lisa was more subtle in her cruelty. She was a morphe, capable of changing her shape to match any species she had seen. She liked to take human form sometimes, walking beside Jake with a mocking smile on a face that looked almost like his. "It must be difficult," she would say in a voice that dripped false sympathy. "Your species is so young, so primitive. You cannot help being inferior." Jake said nothing to her either. He was too busy watching. That was the thing about Jake Morrison. He had not survived 3 wars by being loud or aggressive. He had survived by being patient, by watching, by learning. And he learned a great deal in those first weeks. He learned that plasma weapons needed 2 full seconds to charge before firing. The students would raise their rifles, a high-pitched whine would build, and then the shot would release. 2 seconds was not long in normal life. In combat, it was an eternity. He learned that laser weapons overheated after sustained fire. The crystals inside them could only handle so much energy before they needed to cool down. Skilled users could fire perhaps 10 shots before their weapon became useless for several minutes. He learned that the shields everyone wore were specifically designed to stop high-energy attacks. Plasma and lasers released massive amounts of energy in short bursts. The shields absorbed this energy and dispersed it harmlessly. They were miracles of engineering, capable of stopping almost any weapon in the galaxy. Almost any weapon. Jake began to form an idea. He also noticed something else, something that surprised him more than the technology. None of these aliens knew how to take cover. In every simulation, students would walk into the open and shoot at each other. They would stand in clear sight and trade fire until someone's shield failed. There was no hiding, no ambush tactics, no use of terrain. War had become a simple math problem. Your shield strength against their weapon power. Whoever had better numbers won. Why would we hide? Tom asked when Jake brought this up. Shields protect us. Cover is unnecessary. What if your shield fails? Tom's scales shifted color slightly. Jake had learned this meant confusion. Then I would lose the match. But that rarely happens unless I am outgunned. What about real combat? What about war? War is the same. Better shields and better weapons determine victory. This has been true for thousands of cycles. Jake shook his head slowly. You fight like it's a game. Like there are rules. Like death is just a number on a scoreboard. Because that is what combat is, Tom said. At least, that is what it has become. That night, Jake could not sleep. He lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about everything he had learned. The shields, the weapons, the tactics, the arrogance. These aliens had forgotten what war really was. They had technology so advanced that violence had become clean and safe. They had never felt the terror of bullets flying past their heads. They had never held a dying friend in their arms. They had never known what it meant to fight for survival. Jake got out of bed and picked up his rifle. The academy had a fabrication laboratory. Students could use it to create equipment for their projects. The AI that ran the lab was helpful but confused when Jake explained what he wanted. You wish to modify your kinetic weapon? The AI asked. Such weapons are considered obsolete. I have limited data on their design. That's okay, Jake said. I know what I need. I just need you to make the parts. Over the next several weeks, Jake worked in secret. He came to the lab every night after training. He studied the shield technology, learning exactly how it worked. He tested different materials, different designs, different approaches. The shields were calibrated to stop energy weapons. They detected the energy signature of plasma and lasers and activated to absorb the attack. But kinetic weapons were different. A bullet was just a piece of metal moving very fast. There was no energy signature to detect. The shields still stopped bullets, but only because their default setting created a solid barrier. The key was velocity. Jake created new ammunition. Tungsten cores wrapped in depleted uranium tips. Propellant charges that pushed the bullet to speeds far beyond what any Earth weapon could achieve. At hypersonic velocities, the bullet would hit the shield so fast that the barrier could not form quickly enough to stop it. At least. That was the theory. Jake tested his first modified round against a training shield late one night. He set the shield to maximum power, took aim, and fired. The bullet punched through like the shield was not there. Jake stood in the empty lab, looking at the hole in the wall behind where the shield had been. His heart was beating fast. His hands were steady. The joke of the academy smiled in the darkness. "Let's see who's laughing now," he said quietly. The annual war games were coming. Every team in the academy would compete, and Jake Morrison was ready to show these aliens what a human could do. The War Games. War Games were the most important event at the academy. Students trained for years hoping to compete. Winners received immediate commissions in the Galactic Fleet. Losers went home in shame. The competition had been running for over 800 cycles, and its champions were legends throughout the galaxy. Teams were formed 1 month before the event. The best students chose each other, forming powerful groups that dominated the competition year after year. Mike led Team 3, the favorites to win. His squad included 4 of the top 10 ranked students in the academy. Nobody wanted Jake on their team. He was assigned to Team 17, a group of students that the academy had essentially thrown away. They met for the first time in a small training room, and Jake looked at his new teammates with careful eyes. David was a Volari medic. He was tall and thin, with silver skin that seemed almost transparent. His 4 hands shook constantly, and he could not meet anyone's eyes. He had failed every combat examination, but excelled in healing and medicine. The other students called him a coward. Emma was a Dreth engineer. She had failed her combat courses twice and was on her final chance before expulsion. Her scales were a dull brown instead of the bright colors most Dreth displayed. She spent all her time with machines and robots, talking to them more than she talked to other people. Ryan was a veteran. He was an older Volari who had lost 2 of his 4 arms in a pirate attack years ago. The academy allowed him to train, but everyone knew a 2-armed Volari could never succeed in real combat. He moved with a limp and rarely spoke. Grace was a small Morphe. Where Lisa was aggressive and cruel, Grace was quiet and gentle. She preferred diplomacy to fighting and had begged to transfer to the academy's political division. Her request was denied. She was told to fight or leave. These were the misfits. The failures. The students nobody believed in. Jake looked at each of them and saw something different than everyone else saw. "We're going to win," he said. The others stared at him. "That is not possible," David said quietly. "We are the weakest team in the competition." "No," Jake replied. "We're the most underestimated. There's a difference." He spent the next month training them. Not in the way the academy trained soldiers, but in the way humans had fought wars for thousands of years. Emma learned to build traps. Her engineering skills were perfect for creating explosive devices, motion sensors, and mechanical ambushes. She had never thought of using her knowledge for combat, but once Jake showed her the possibilities, she became obsessed. David learned combat medicine. Not just healing after battle, but treating wounds during a fight. He learned to move under fire, to stabilize injuries quickly, to keep his team alive when shields failed. His hands stopped shaking when he realized he could save lives instead of take them. Ryan discovered that 2 arms were enough. Jake taught him close combat techniques from Earth. martial arts designed for humans who had only 2 arms. The old Valari was slow but incredibly strong. His remaining arms were like steel cables. Grace was Jake's secret weapon. Her ability to change shape made her the perfect scout. She could become a bird, a rock, a piece of furniture. She could watch enemy teams without being seen. She could deliver false information and create confusion. And Jake himself? He spent every night in the fabrication lab, creating more of his special ammunition. Tungsten and uranium death, packed into small metal cylinders. The first round of the war games took place on an abandoned mining station. Team 17 faced Team 3, the favorites. Mike and his elite squad against the jokes of the academy. The station was dark and full of shadows. Rusted metal corridors twisted through the structure like veins. Perfect terrain for what Jake had planned. They'll come straight down the main passage, Jake told his team. They don't know how to do anything else. He positioned himself on a cargo platform 800 meters from the station's entrance. It was a distance that would be impossible for plasma weapons, which lost coherence beyond 300 meters. A distance where no alien sniper would even bother looking. But for Jake's rifle, it was an easy shot. The rest of the team spread out through the station. Emma placed her traps at key intersections. David set up a medical station in a hidden room. Ryan waited in the shadows of a narrow corridor. Grace changed her shape to look like a piece of mining equipment and sat perfectly still. Team 3 entered the station with complete confidence. Their shields glowed bright blue in the darkness. Their plasma rifles hummed with power. Mike led them forward, not even bothering to check for enemies. "The humans team is here somewhere," he said to his squad. "Find them quickly. This will not take long." Jake watched through his scope. 800 meters. A gentle crosswind from the station's ventilation system. Artificial gravity at 92% Earth. Standard. He adjusted his aim slightly and placed his finger on the trigger. Mike stepped into view, laughing at something one of his teammates said. His shield glowed around him like armor made of light. Jake exhaled slowly. Between heartbeats, he squeezed the trigger. The tungsten round left his rifle at 3,000 meters per second. It crossed the 800 meters in less than a second. It hit Mike's shield and punched through like the barrier was made of paper. The round struck his chest plate, shattered it, and triggered his elimination beacon. Mike disappeared in a flash of light. Transported to the medical bay, the arena went completely silent. Victor's voice came over the broadcast system. The old instructor sounded confused. "What just happened? How did Team 3 lose a member?" No weapons were fired within detection range. Jake chambered another round. Team 3 was panicking now. They had never experienced this before. One of their members was gone, eliminated by something they could not see or understand. Their shields were supposed to protect them. Nothing could penetrate their shields. Another shot. Another elimination. Mike's teammates started running, abandoning their formation. They did not know where to go. They had never needed to take cover before. They ran straight into Emma's traps. Explosions filled the corridors. Students screamed as their shields overloaded from the unexpected attacks. Ryan appeared from the shadows, his 2 remaining arms grabbing an enemy student and throwing him into a wall hard enough to trigger elimination. It was chaos. Beautiful, terrifying chaos. In 4 minutes, Team 3 was completely eliminated. Team 17 stood victorious in the ruined station. Jake climbed down from his platform and joined his team. They were covered in dust and breathing hard. David was treating a minor wound on Emma's arm. Ryan was flexing his mechanical fingers. Grace had returned to her normal shape, her face showing amazement. "We won," she whispered. "We actually won." Above them, the broadcast system crackled. The entire academy had been watching. Thousands of students and instructors had just witnessed. Something impossible. The jokes had defeated the champions, and Jake Morrison was just getting started. The philosophy of violence, the Academy had never seen anything like it. Team 17 won their second match, then their third, then their fourth. Each victory was more dominant than the last. Each battle left the alien students more confused and afraid. Jake's rifle had become legendary. Stories spread through the Academy like fire through dry grass. The human weapon that ignored shields. The primitive tool that could kill from distances no plasma rifle could reach. Students who had laughed at Jake now walked quickly past him in the corridors, their eyes avoiding his. But it was not just the rifle. It was everything. Emma's traps had become infamous. She created devices that no one expected. Pressure plates that triggered explosions. Tripwires connected to stun grenades. Motion sensors that activated plasma charges stolen from defeated enemies. The engineering student who had failed twice was now one of the most feared members of any team. David's medical skills saved his teammates again and again. While other teams relied on their shields and lost members when those shields failed, Team 17 could take hits and keep fighting. David would appear from nowhere, his four hands moving with perfect precision, treating wounds and getting soldiers back into the fight within minutes. Ryan was a terror in close combat. Students had learned to fear the narrow corridors and dark rooms where the two-armed veteran waited. He fought with a brutality that shocked aliens who had never experienced real violence. He did not defeat his enemies. He destroyed them, and Grace was everywhere and nowhere. She scouted enemy positions without being seen. She fed false information to opposing teams. She appeared as a rock until an enemy walked past, then changed into a combat form and struck from behind. The quiet diplomat had become an assassin. The war games continued. Team 17 advanced to the semifinals, then to the final match. They would face Team 1, the champions for 11 consecutive cycles. It was the greatest upset in the competition's history. But before the final match, Master Victor summoned Jake to his chambers. The old instructor's room was simple and sparse. Weapons from dozens of different species hung on the walls. Medals and awards sat on shelves, covered in dust. Victor stood at his window, his mechanical arm clicking softly as he moved. "Sit," he said without turning around. Jake sat. "I have studied your world's history," Victor said. "I ordered every record we have about Earth, every war, every battle, every weapon. Do you know what I found?" "I can guess." Victor turned to face him. His black eyes were unreadable, but his voice was different than before. Softer, more respectful. "Your species has been at war with itself for your entire existence. You have never known true peace. Even now, with aliens visiting your planet and offering you the stars, your nations still point weapons at each other. You have developed ways to kill that horrify even the oldest warriors in the galaxy. Nuclear fire that poisons the ground for generations. Chemical weapons that melt flesh from bone. Biological plagues designed to spread and kill millions." Jake said nothing. This was all true. "And yet," Victor continued, "you still cling to your primitive projectile weapons. Your rifles and pistols and cannons. Why? You have nuclear technology. You could destroy cities from orbit. But your soldiers still carry guns that throw small pieces of metal. Why?" Jake thought about this question. He had never put the answer into words before. "Because they remind us," he said finally. "Remind you of what?" "That violence has a cost." Jake leaned forward. "When I pull the trigger of my rifle, I feel the recoil. I hear the sound. I smell the gunpowder. Every shot is a choice I make. Every bullet is something I can never take back. Your weapons are different. You push a button and millions die, but you never see it, never feel it. It becomes abstract. Numbers on a screen. Victor listened without speaking. The galaxy has done the same thing with plasma and shields, Jake continued. You have made war clean, safe, bloodless. Students in your academy fight matches and get eliminated. They feel nothing. They learn nothing. They have never held a dying friend in their arms. They have never felt the terror of knowing that the next second might be their last. Jake stood up and walked to the window, standing beside Victor. My grandfather fought in a war called Vietnam. He carried a rifle very similar to mine. He used to say that the difference between a soldier and a killer is that a soldier carries his ghosts with him. The people he killed stay with him forever. That weight, that burden, it makes you careful. It makes you fight only when you have to. It makes you value life because you understand. Death. Victor was quiet for a long time. You are saying that our technology has made us forget what violence truly means. I'm saying you fight like people who have never really bled. And when you face an enemy who fights like they have something to lose, you don't know what to do. Victor walked to a shelf and picked up an old weapon. It was crude and ugly, nothing like the sleek plasma rifles of the modern age. Jake recognized it as a kinetic weapon, ancient and worn. This belonged to my grandfather, Victor said. One of the first Valari to fight in interstellar war before shields were invented. He told me stories about those days. Stories of fear and blood and desperate courage. Stories that my generation dismissed as primitive history. He set the weapon back on the shelf. The Galactic Assembly is not as peaceful as it appears, Sergeant Morrison. Our scouts have detected something at the edge of the galaxy. A species we have never encountered. They use kinetic weapons and brutal tactics. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They simply attack and destroy. Jake felt a cold feeling in his stomach. Our plasma rifles do not stop them. Our shields do not protect us. We have lost 17 scout ships in the past cycle. The Assembly is afraid, though they will not admit it publicly. Victor looked at Jake with those ancient black eyes. After the war games, the Council will want to speak with you. About what? About teaching us to fight like humans. About reminding us what it means to bleed. Jake thought about the final match tomorrow. He thought about his team of misfits and failures. He thought about the aliens who had mocked him and the weapon they had called obsolete. Win your match first, Victor said. Show them what a human can do. Then we will talk about saving the galaxy. Jake nodded and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold. Master Victor, the war games. Will you be watching? The old instructor almost smiled. I have not missed a final match in 200 cycles. I will be watching closely, Sergeant Morrison. Very closely indeed. Jake left the chamber and walked through the dark corridors toward his room. Tomorrow was the most important day of his life. Tomorrow he would prove that humanity belonged among the stars. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn to fear the sound of gunfire. The human way of war, the jungle moon hung in space like a green and blue jewel. Dense forests covered every surface. Thick fog rolled through the valleys. Strange creatures moved through the shadows, some harmless and some deadly. This was the battlefield for the final match of the WAMES. Team 1 had prepared carefully. They were the champions, the elite, the best soldiers the Academy had produced in over a decade. Their leader, a massive Valari named Samuel, had studied every recording of Team 17's matches. He understood what Jake's rifle could do. He had developed countermeasures. His team wore experimental high-density shields, twice as powerful as standard equipment. They moved in tight formation, covering every angle. They swept the perimeter with sensor drones that could detect heat, movement, and energy signatures. They were careful and professional and deadly. It was not enough. The match began at dawn, when the fog was thickest. Both teams were dropped at opposite ends of the jungle, 3 kilometers apart. The rules were simple. Eliminate all members of the opposing team. Last team standing wins. Samuel led his squad through the forest with military precision. His drones flew ahead, scanning for threats. His team stayed close together, their shields overlapping to create a wall of protective energy. Nothing would surprise them. Grace floated above them in the shape of a native bird. She had spent the previous night studying the moon's wildlife. She knew exactly which creatures were common and which were rare. She knew how they moved and how they sounded. Now she drifted on warm air currents, watching the enemy team with eyes that looked exactly like a harmless jungle animal. Jake received her report through a small communication device hidden in his ear. He was positioned 2 kilometers away, lying in a carefully constructed nest of branches and leaves. His rifle rested on a stable platform he had built from fallen trees. His scope showed him the jungle in perfect clarity. "They're moving toward the river," Grace's voice whispered. "Tight formation. Those new shields are strong. I can see the energy output from here." "The shields don't matter," Jake replied. "We're not going to fight them directly." Emma was already in position. She had spent hours before the match secretly entering the jungle and placing her devices. The Academy's rules allowed teams to arrive early for reconnaissance. No one had thought to use that time for sabotage. The jungle was now a death trap. Samuel's team reached the river crossing. It was the only safe path through a deep swamp filled with toxic plants and aggressive creatures. They had studied the terrain. They knew this was the route their enemies would expect them to take. They took it anyway because their shields would protect them from any ambush. Emma pressed a button on her control device. The ground beneath Team 1 exploded. Emma had buried seismic charges under the riverbed. Not plasma charges, which the shields might detect. Old-fashioned explosives, mixing chemicals she had created in the Academy's lab. The blast threw mud and water and rock in every direction. It did not damage the shields, but it destroyed the ground beneath the enemy team's feet. Samuel and his squad fell into a pit that had been solid ground a moment before. Their shields protected them from the fall, but they were now trapped at the bottom of a 4-meter hole, covered in mud and completely disoriented. Ryan was waiting at the edge of the pit. He dropped smoke grenades down into the hole. The thick gray smoke filled the space, blinding the trapped soldiers. Then he jumped down among them. Close combat in zero visibility against an enemy who could not spread out or use their ranged weapons. It was exactly what Ryan had trained for. His 2 remaining arms moved with brutal efficiency. He grabbed enemies and slammed them into walls. He struck pressure points that Jake had taught him, points that worked on Valaria anatomy. He fought like a demon in the smoke and darkness. 3 members of Team 1 were eliminated before they understood what was happening. Samuel and his remaining teammate managed to climb out of the pit. They ran into the jungle, abandoning their formation, their careful plans destroyed. Behind them, they could hear Ryan's elimination beacon activate as the enemy soldiers finally managed to coordinate and strike back. But Ryan had done his job. Team 1 was scattered and afraid. David was waiting at the rally point. He had predicted where the surviving enemies would run. Panicked soldiers always ran the same way, toward high ground, toward safety, toward the direction they thought contained no threats. The young medic, who had been called a coward, stepped out of the shadows and faced the 2 remaining enemies. They laughed. David was thin and weak. He had no combat training. He was nothing compared to champions like them. David raised his hands and showed them the device he was holding. It was a neural disruptor, something David had designed himself. It did not kill or injure. It simply overwhelmed the nervous system for a few seconds, long enough to disable enemies. long enough for the thin, weak medic to attach elimination beacons to both of them before they could react. Samuel vanished in a flash of light, transported to the medical bay. His teammate followed a second later. The match was over. The broadcast system was silent for a long moment. Then Victor's voice spoke, filled with something that might have been wonder. The War Games champion, for the first time in the Academy's history, is Team 17. The human-led team has defeated all opponents. Jake climbed down from his position. He had not fired a single shot in the final match. He had not needed to. His team had done everything. He found them at the extraction point. Anna was laughing, covered in mud from her explosives. David was smiling shyly, looking at the neural disruptor in his hands like he could not believe what he had done. Grace had returned to her normal form and was hugging everyone she could reach. Ryan's body lay nearby, but his spirit was with them. He had sacrificed himself to take down 3 enemies. That was victory. Jake looked at these aliens, these misfits and failures who had learned to fight like humans. Pride filled his chest like warm fire. "We did it," Emma said. "We actually did it." 3 months later, Jake stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council. 12 representatives from the galaxy's most powerful species sat before him. Their faces showed fear, hope, and desperation in equal measure. "The threat at the edge of the galaxy grows worse each day," the council speaker said. "We have lost more ships, more colonies. Our weapons are ineffective. Our shields are useless. We face an enemy that fights with kinetic weapons and brutal tactics. An enemy that knows how to bleed." Jake nodded. "I've read the reports. You have shown that humans understand this kind of warfare. Your victory at the Academy has demonstrated that your methods work against opponents who rely on shields and plasma." The speaker leaned forward. "Sergeant Morrison, we are formally requesting that humanity establish a joint military training program. We need soldiers who understand violence. We need soldiers who carry the weight of their choices. We need soldiers who fight like they have something to lose." Jake thought about his grandfather, about the rifle that had been passed down through generations. He thought about the weight of every bullet and the ghosts that soldiers carried. He thought about David and Emma and Ryan and Grace, aliens who had learned the human way of war. "We'll teach you," Jake said. "We'll teach you everything. But I hope you're ready to learn." "What do you mean?" Jake looked at the council, at these powerful beings who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had forgotten what it meant to truly fight. They had made war clean and safe and bloodless. Now they faced an enemy that would teach them fear. "Violence has a cost," Jake said. "Every life you take stays with you forever. We'll teach you how to fight, but we'll also teach you what fighting really means. The nightmares, the guilt, the weight that never goes away. That's the price of being a warrior instead of just a soldier with a fancy weapon." The council was quiet. Humanity has been at war since the first human picked up a rock and threw it at another human. We've never stopped fighting, never stopped learning, never stopped remembering the cost. Jake smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "That's why we still use rifles. That's why we still carry our ghosts. And that's why, when everything else fails, you called us." He turned and walked toward the door. "Training begins tomorrow. I suggest you get some sleep. It may be the last peaceful night you have for a very long time." Behind him, the galaxy's leaders watched the human walk away. The small, fragile creature from a primitive planet. The joke who had become a legend. The soldier who remembered what violence truly meant. The stars were waiting, and humanity was ready to teach the galaxy how to fight.